The slap came so fast I did not even see her hand move. One second, I was sitting in the chair behind the CEO's desk, waiting for a meeting that had not started yet. The next second, my head snapped sideways, my glasses skidded across the carpet, and a voice sharp enough to cut glass filled the entire office. Get out of his chair! Who do you think you are sitting there like you own this place? I pressed my palm against my burning cheek and looked up at the woman standing over me. Brenna Voss, executive assistant to the CEO of Castellan Logistics, for the past 2 years, 27 years old, immaculate in a cream blazer, her chest rising and falling with real fury. She had just struck me across the face in front of two junior associates who had frozen mid-step in the open doorway. And that was the exact moment my husband walked in. I need to back up, because none of what happened in that office makes any sense without the 11 weeks before it, and it started in a town called Ferris Bend, Oregon, population just under 9,000, the kind of place where everyone recognizes your car before they recognize your face. My name is Adele. Adele Castellan, born Adele Marrow. I am 44 years old, and for 22 years I have been married to a man named Hollis Castellan, who built a regional freight and logistics company from 2 trucks and a borrowed warehouse into something that now moves cargo across 4 states. Hollis is careful and exacting, the kind of man who reads contracts twice and never raises his voice, because he has never once needed to. I am the opposite. I read rooms instead of contracts. I spent 18 years in pharmaceutical sales before the company I worked for got bought out and quietly dissolved my entire division on a Friday afternoon in March. The kind of corporate email that arrives between a calendar reminder and a lunch order and changes your whole life without ceremony. I did not panic right away. We had savings. Hollis told me to take my time finding the right next step, and he meant it kindly. But I am not someone who can sit still for long, and Ferris Bend in early spring is not a place built for sitting still gracefully. I applied to a dozen positions over 6 weeks. Nothing landed. The market for someone my age with my specific background was tighter than I expected, and I spent more afternoons than I want to admit on our back porch, watching the river run low behind our property, wondering what exactly my life was supposed to look like now. That is when I started noticing things about Hollis, small things. He had always told me everything about the business, every difficult vendor, every board disagreement, every staffing headache. For 22 years, dinner had been half marriage and half unofficial board meeting, and I had never minded because it meant I knew him completely. Then, sometime in April, he started going quiet about work. Let's not talk shop tonight. It's complicated. You'd find it boring. He had never once thought I would find his work boring in 2 decades of marriage, and the sudden assumption that I might now felt less like consideration and more like a closed door. His hours shifted too. 2 or 3 nights a week, later than usual, his phone face down on the kitchen counter, a habit he had never had before. I told myself I was projecting my own unemployment anxiety onto him, the way people do when their own life feels unstable and they start hunting for instability everywhere else. I told myself that for weeks. Then on a Tuesday night in late May, scrolling through job listings out of habit more than hope, I saw a posting, Executive Operations Coordinator, Castellan Logistics, Ferris Bend, Oregon. Full-time, competitive salary, prior account management experience preferred. I sat with that listing open on my laptop for a long time. Hollis had never once suggested I work at his company. In 22 years, it had simply never come up as a real possibility. He kept work and home in separate rooms of his life, deliberately, and I had always respected that boundary without question. But I was qualified. Genuinely qualified, more than qualified, and something underneath the qualification was pulling at me harder than the job itself. A specific kind of instinct I had built over 18 years of reading buyers who did not want to tell me what they actually needed. I applied using my maiden name, Adele Marrow, the name on my original transcripts, the name attached to none of Hollis's company paperwork. I used a personal email address, listed only my pharmaceutical sales references, people who had only ever known me by that name professionally anyway. And I submitted the application. I got a call back in 3 days. The hiring manager, a calm, efficient man named Philip Yoon, scheduled a phone screen and then an in-person interview. I borrowed a blazer from my neighbor because I did not want to wear anything Hollis might recognize on a video call later, changed my hair part, wore the reading glasses I almost never wore in public, and drove to the Castellan Logistics building, a building I had visited dozens of times for company holiday parties and anniversary lunches, and walked in as a stranger. Philip did not recognize me. Why would he? I had met him exactly once, years earlier, at a company picnic, for maybe 4 minutes. I answered every question cleanly, careful not to seem too polished, careful to let my actual experience speak for itself without revealing how much I already understood about logistics terminology from 22 years of dinner table conversation. He called the next morning. The job was mine. I sat in my car in our driveway with the engine running and the air conditioning on, holding the phone, asking myself one more time whether this was a rational thing to do. I had no concrete evidence Hollis was doing anything wrong. I had quiet evenings and a closed laptop and an instinct I could not fully name. But I thought about 22 years, about the mortgage and the retirement accounts and the way he had started sleeping closer to his own edge of the bed, like there was a wall there neither of us was naming out loud. I accepted the position. I told Hollis I had picked up some short-term remote consulting work to keep busy while I kept searching. He said that was great and went back to his phone. The first 3 weeks at Castellan Logistics were strange in a way I genuinely cannot describe. I sat in a cubicle on the second floor, 40 feet from my husband's corner office. I learned the internal scheduling software from a 24-year-old named Marcus, who had no idea he was training the CEO's wife. I kept my head down. I was careful not to be too good at my job, careful not to draw attention, and I watched. That is when I really started paying attention to Brenna Voss. Brenna had been Hollis's executive assistant for 2 years. I knew she existed in the abstract, the way you know your husband has a secretary, a name mentioned occasionally, nothing more. I had never met her, never been to a single event where she was present, never had reason to. She was 27, sharp-featured, immaculately put together, and she moved through that office like she had quiet ownership of every room in it. She knew Hollis's schedule before he did. She answered his calls before they finished a single ring. She brought his coffee exactly the way he liked it without being asked, set down with a precision that looked almost ceremonial. I also noticed the way her hand lingered half a second too long when she handed him a folder, the way she lowered her voice in the hallway and angled her body slightly away from anyone nearby when she spoke to him, the way she watched the parking lot through the lobby window at the exact time he usually arrived each morning, like she was tracking something. I told myself I was reading too much into all of it, that I was a recently laid-off woman secretly working undercover at her husband's company, and therefore not exactly a neutral observer of anything. And then came the Thursday afternoon that ended that particular form of denial for good. Hollis had stepped out for an off-site vendor meeting that morning and was not due back until the following day. I had a legitimate reason to be near his office, a signed approval form Philip needed delivered before close of business, and the office door was open, the way it usually was when Hollis traveled and his assistant aired the room out. I stepped inside to leave the folder on the desk, the way I had seen 2 other employees do that same week, and on instinct, tired from standing all day, I sat down in his chair for exactly 4 seconds while I checked my phone for the time. That is when Brenna walked in. What happened next took about 3 seconds and rearranged everything. She looked at me sitting in that chair, and something in her face shifted from composed to something raw and unguarded that I had not seen on an adult face outside of very specific circumstances. "Get out of his chair," she said, her voice climbing fast. "Who do you think you are sitting there like you own this place? You do not get to just walk in here and sit in his chair like that's yours to do." The room went very still. I felt my stomach drop, not because of the words about the chair, but because of the word she used next, low and shaking. And then the slap came, and then the footsteps in the hallway, fast and familiar, footsteps I had memorized over 2 decades of marriage. And then the door, already open, filled completely by Hollis Castellan, who had come back early from his off-site meeting, standing there in his gray suit, looking first at Brenna, then at me, his face moving through several expressions in the space of 2 seconds. And I watched every single one of them. I sat there with my hand against my burning cheek, my glasses on the floor near my foot, and I waited to see which version of my husband was about to walk into that room. The man I had spent 22 years building a life with, or the stranger who had apparently been building something else entirely behind a door he had quietly started keeping closed. What he did next was not what I expected, and it was certainly not what Brenna expected. He looked at her, then he looked at me, and he said, very quietly, "Adele, not Ms. Marrow." Not a stranger's name, mine. Brenna's head turned so fast her earring caught the light, and in the back of my mind, behind the sting and the shock, I thought about a phone call I had overheard 9 days earlier, late in the evening. Hollis's voice low and urgent through the study door, cut off the moment he heard my footsteps in the hall. I had caught only a fragment. She cannot find out about the transfer, not the situation. The transfer. The word had stuck in my brain like a splinter, and I had been turning it over ever since without knowing what it would eventually unlock. Standing there, watching my husband's face, I started to understand that whatever I had quietly come here looking for, it was larger and more complicated than a secretary who had simply lost track of the line between admiration and entitlement. Adele? Hollis said again, like the word cost him something he had not planned on paying that day. Brenna went completely still. The fury in her eyes did not vanish. It reorganized into something colder. You know her, she said. It was not a question. Hollis stepped fully into the office, his jaw tight, his hands very still at his sides, the way they got when he was thinking fast and trying to buy himself time. I had watched those hands for 22 years. I knew every version of them. Everyone needs a minute, he said to the room, and Marcus, who had appeared in the doorway behind him, disappeared instantly back down the hall. Philip, hovering near the copier with an expression of a man desperate to be anywhere else on the planet, backed out and pulled the door most of the way closed. That left the three of us, me with the handprint still warming on my cheek, Hollis in his gray suit, and Brenna, whose cream blazer suddenly looked like armor she was no longer sure would hold. Hollis, she said, and there was a warning underneath it. Stop, he said to her. Just that single word, flat and tired. The voice of a man who had been quietly dreading this exact moment for months and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. And something in the way he said it told me a truth I had not fully let myself believe yet. He was not a man caught in the middle of something thrilling. He was a man living inside a very bad decision that had outgrown his ability to manage it. That did not make it better. I want to be clear about that. It did not make any of it better. But it clarified things considerably. I lowered my hand from my cheek, straightened my back, and said calmly, Brenna, I need you to tell me exactly what you meant when you said I do not get to act like his wife. Her chin came up. I meant exactly what I said. Are you under the impression that you and Hollis are something more than employer and employee? I asked. That is between me and Hollis, she said. It is very much between me and Hollis as well, I said, because I am his wife. Have been for 22 years. My legal name is Adele Castellan. You are welcome to verify that whenever you like. The color drained out of her face slowly, not all at once, the way water leaves a sink. She turned to Hollis, and whatever was breaking open on her face, I almost felt something for it. Almost. You told me you two were separated, she said, her voice gone thin. You told me the paperwork was already moving. Hollis did not answer her directly. He looked at the floor. What paperwork? I said. Nothing, he said. Hollis? What paperwork? He sat down heavily in the chair across from his own desk, an oddly undignified posture for a man who never sat that way. I need to call my attorney, I said. I picked up my purse from my cubicle, walked past Philip without a word, and took the elevator down to the parking lot. I did not run. There was nothing left to run from. The worst of it had already happened in that office, and I was still standing. I called my sister Dana from the parking lot. Dana is a paralegal in Eugene, which is why she was the first person I thought to call, even before I thought of an attorney directly. I told her everything in under 5 minutes, standing beside my car in the late afternoon heat. The transfer, Dana said after a silence, that is what you need to find out about. If he moved money somewhere you do not know about, using documentation he is showing other people, that is not just a marriage problem anymore, Adele. Write this name down. Call her tonight, not tomorrow. She gave me the name of a family law attorney in Portland named Renata Suk, who Dana said had a particular reputation for finding exactly what husbands believed they had hidden well enough. I called her that evening from our kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of dinners, where our son Eli had done his homework through middle school, and she listened to me for nearly 20 minutes without interrupting, which told me immediately I had called the right person. The transfer language is the key piece, she said when I finished. If he represented his marital status falsely to obtain financing, sign a lease, or move funds in a way that depended on a document showing you as separated, We are looking at something well past a standard divorce filing. I need you to gather everything you can access through legitimate means before he realizes what is happening. Do not move any accounts yet. Just gather. Hollis came home that night at 9:15. I was sitting in the living room with every light in the house on, deliberately, because I wanted him to see me clearly. No shadows, no soft lighting to hide behind. He stopped in the doorway. He looked older than he had that morning, the kind of aging that happens to a face in a single day. "Sit down, Hollis," I said. He sat across from me, not beside me, and folded his hands. "How long?" I asked. 16 months, he said. I sat with that number. 16 months. Eli had still been living at home for the first 4 of them. "What paperwork did you show her?" I said. A long silence. "There was a draft separation agreement," he said finally. "It was never filed, never signed by you. I let her believe it was further along than it actually was." "Did you forge my signature on anything?" I asked. Another long pause. "There was a document with your name typed on it." "I did not forge a signature exactly. I drafted it and let her see it without telling her it was never executed." "That is what forging means, Hollis?" I said. He did not argue. "What about the transfer?" I said. "What did you move, and what did you use to justify moving it?" He looked at me with something close to surprise, as though he had forgotten, somewhere in the last 16 months, that I was not a woman who needed things spelled out twice. "There was a personal loan," he said. "Brenna needed a co-signer for a property purchase. I used the draft separation agreement to represent to the lender that my assets were already being divided, to justify why a portion of company profit distribution was being routed through a personal account rather than our joint one." I sat with that for a long moment. A falsified document used to move company money, used to deceive a lender. That was not simply a broken marriage, that was fraud, with paperwork trail attached. "I have an attorney," I said. "Her name is Renata Suk. You should retain your own. I'm sleeping in the guest room. Please do not come in there." What followed was not quick, and I want to be honest about that, because the versions of this story that wrap up clean within days are not telling the truth about how divorce actually moves. It crawls through courts on its own schedule. It generates more paperwork than feels survivable, and it costs money you had planned to spend on entirely different things. Renata Suk was exactly what Dana had promised: methodical, unhurried, immune to Hollis's attorney's early posture of reasonable man, minor lapse. She obtained the draft separation agreement and confirmed it had never been filed or executed. She subpoenaed the personal loan documentation and traced the transfer through 2 accounts I had not known existed. Combined with my share of the marital estate and the settlement Renata eventually negotiated, I came out of that process with the house, which I chose to sell anyway, and enough stability to stop holding my breath about what came next. Brenna resigned from Castellan Logistics 3 weeks after that afternoon in the office. I heard this from Marcus, who texted me after I had also left the company, with a documented resignation that included a written account of the assault, the slap, in writing, with 2 witness statements attached, Marcus and Philip both confirming exactly what they had seen from the doorway. I did not pursue assault charges against Brenna. Renata told me I had every right to. I decided my energy was better spent elsewhere, and that I had already taken from her the thing she believed she had, which was a man building a real future with her. He was not. By the time the divorce was final, I understood that clearly, and it was not a comforting realization, but it was an accurate one. Hollis had been running a second, quieter life alongside the real one, and he had told himself, and told Brenna, whatever kept that second life running smoothly. He was never planning to leave. He was planning indefinite continuation. Our son Eli came home from college the weekend I told him. He sat across from me at that same kitchen table, the one I sold with the house 2 months later, and he asked if I was going to be okay. And I told him the truth, which was yes, eventually, and I meant it. Hollis and I have not spoken since the day I handed him the divorce petition across that same coffee table. Renata handled all communication through his attorney after that, and once the settlement was signed, there was nothing left that required our voices to share a room. I moved to Portland in October. I found a 2-bedroom apartment with a small balcony that looks out over a quiet street lined with maple trees starting to turn. I took a job, a real one this time, no disguise required, as a regional accounts director for a medical supply distributor. My coworkers know me only as Adele Marrow, and I have not felt any particular need to mention the rest. Dana drove up to help me move in. We carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs in the cold October air, and when we finally sat down on the balcony with takeout containers between us, she looked at me and said, "You look different." "I look tired," I said. "No," she said. "You look like yourself." I thought about that for a long time after she left. What it actually means to look like yourself after 22 years of being half of something else. It does not mean I'm glad any of this happened. It does not mean the marriage was a waste. Eli exists because of those 22 years, and so do a great many real good mornings that I am not going to pretend away just to make this story tidier. But here is what I know now. Standing on my own balcony with coffee, I made in a kitchen that belongs entirely to me. I spent 18 years reading buyers I had never met before, understanding exactly what they needed before they said it out loud. And then I went home every night and turned that same skill completely off because I had convinced myself that was what loving someone required. I was wrong about that. Seeing someone clearly was never a threat to love. It was the only thing that ever made love real in the first place. My cheeks stopped hurting within a week. Everything